Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move.
All right, Hal. I'll go in through the emergency airlock.
Without your space helmet, Dave, we're going to find that rather difficult.
Hal, I won't argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
Hal? 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 Hal?
Hi everyone, this is Jason Burack of Wall Street from Main Street and Eric Dubin. Welcome to another episode of Welcome to Dystopia, episode number 3. Eric, today's topic is very important. Recently, in the last number of months, there's been a lot of academic papers that have come out really towards the end of 2014 about this subject. Foreign Affairs magazine, I think it's on the cover of their, or Foreign Affairs or Foreign Policy. Foreign Affairs, I think it's on the cover of their magazine. Yeah, Foreign Affairs. And also there was a very controversial book I just read by Martin Ford. I think he's a successful entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, and it's getting a lot of buzz. It's called Rise of the Robots. So in this, I think it's a very dystopian topic about automation and robots, and I think it's a very important one for our listeners, where robots may the age of robots may drastically accelerate in the next couple decades while we're having a financial crisis.
It is indeed, and the book is getting a lot of buzz now. In fact, just this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Steen, they were talking about these themes in the book itself. So, it's just beginning to puncture into the mainstream media and gain traction. And it is a valid concern. I mean, Ford spoke about upwards of 50% of U.S. jobs being lost to a process of automation and just the robotic intelligence takeover of white-collar jobs. So this is not just the factory-style automation that we are all used to that has been in our economy in terms of production for many, many decades now, but it's an expansive, greater flexibility and takeover of many menial jobs and even white-collar jobs that robotics can, in fact, usurp.
Yeah, in this podcast, I want to spend a good amount of time going through his book, kind of a book review from my perspective about his book, his research and his view of markets and things like that, and also maybe a little bit of background about him, because his solutions, and we'll use those in quotes, are for someone who cares about their freedom and wants to be an entrepreneur and build their business. It's very dystopian, let's just say. It's his view of the world, what's progress and good future for him is dystopian to more people who are freedom-oriented or libertarian or Austrian school economist types.
His solutions, in fact, may not even work, given the fact that, he's ultimately calling for the nanny state and redistribution of wealth to provision some kind of a social safety net that catches people that lose their jobs. But before we dive into that analysis, I think it's probably best to just speak to what, in fact, he's describing as the processes and evolution of robotics and automation taking over jobs and what's going to happen. So take it from there.
Sure. Well, I did a lot of research on the robotics sector last year. I actually did an interview with Jason Harmon for his podcast in September 2014, and it was over an hour. It was diagnosing this documentary that you also saw, a short one on YouTube, Eric, that our listeners should check out, called Humans Need Not Apply. And on top of that, for robotics research, I've looked at robotics companies. I've also read the two main robotics books that are out there, which is Second Machine Age, and also recently I just finished Rise of the Robots. And one of the main things about the robotics industry, I can tell you, is it's a confluence of things all coming together that's really making it the rise of the robots, that's increasing automation a lot more likely than it was a number of decades ago. There's a number of documentaries out there on YouTube our listeners can go look at that are old robotics documentaries, 10, 15, 20 years old. And the gains that we have had in automation and robotics, most of the robots experts, almost all of them, in fact, said were not going to be possible in their lifetimes. And so we've accomplished basically 40, 50 years, 60 years of work that most robotic experts 10, 15, 20 years ago didn't think would occur in their lifetimes, and we've done it, Eric, in the last 10 or 12 years. So we've gotten a humongous acceleration curve, and I think a lot of that is due, and there's, like I said, a number of factors, and I'll name some of them, and you can add them if I missed a few. But I think one of them is Moore's Law. So we have computing power drastically increasing still with the amount of transistors that can be added to the chip. The cost of the chips are coming down. A lot of the components for many of these types of robots in different industries, they've fallen 90% or more in the last 8 to 10 years. So that's helping matters. The costs have come down that much. The quality of the devices. So HD webcams, which were kind of maybe available, a high quality video camera to put on something smaller, they were available a number of years ago, but the cost of them were thousands of dollars. Now these things, Eric, for HD webcams and sensors and things like that and microchips, the cost has fallen so much. So now you can integrate all of these things together. You have a lot better software written by apps and smartphones and things like that that are meant to control smaller things rather than just desktops and laptops. So all of these factors combined then with politicians trying to force the labor markets, the wages higher with higher minimum wages, and also cheap capital from financial repression and global central bankers forcing down interest rates and making capital so cheap. This is creating the law of unintended consequences in action, or maybe we can argue, and maybe there's a lot of intention. It's being done intentionally by the elites. But all these factors combined is allowing for a rapid acceleration and innovation of robotics to really take off, and the development, the rapid growth in improvement in robots is here, and it's I think it's unfortunately for people, it could mean a lot of jobs going forward are going to be destroyed. It's not just that one study. There's a number of other studies, and the ranges are predicting, I think, whether it's Harvard or MIT or some of these other some of these other universities, they're predicting, Eric, a good solid 30 to 50% across the board in job variance of being cut. And like you said, it's potentially doctors' jobs, and it's potentially lawyers' jobs. It's pharmacists. Martin Ford talked about pharmacists losing a lot of jobs in his book. And it's also, the lower-end skilled employees where, I talked about the minimum wage. Well, look at McDonald's, right? If McDonald's is going to be forced to pay $15 an hour in Los Angeles or Seattle or other restaurants they're going to switch to touch screens. They're going to have robot counters or robot hamburger makers and things like that, and that's what's being tested right now.
Yeah. And that documentary that you mentioned, Humans Need Not Apply, which, by the way, to our listeners, all you have to do is go to YouTube and put that phrase into the search engine, and you'll find it right at the top. That documentary actually made a number of fascinating analyses on a per industry or per application basis, including robots taking over creativity and artists even being pushed out, where they provide an example of an automated computer system and algorithm that produces compositions of music that are indistinguishable from someone who actually framed it up in their head and put it down on paper. And to some extent, that is in fact going to happen. I mean, there is not any sacred cow amongst any kind of profession out there. The first and foremost thing that people need to keep in the back of their minds is that flexibility in terms of one's skill set is probably the most important thing going forward in the decades to come, because of the fact that so much is going to be in flux, it really is almost impossible to predict with 100% certainty what particular job field or whatnot would be safe. I mean, people sometimes ask, well, if you had to recommend where our college-age children should be spending their time and focusing on what degrees to pursue and whatnot, it's not an easy answer. and maybe we can dive into that subject right now, too, because it is important. I mean, when it comes to where you can imagine the future being a little bit more safe than an average job, things along the lines of just having a high competency in mathematics, generically speaking, or computer programming, are areas where you'll probably have a lot more job security. I mean, not everyone is built for that kind of thing, though, unfortunately. I mean, some people have an abject fear of mathematics that make it such that they would never really do very well studying computer science or what have you. Jason and I have talked about a number of other fields that are probably a lot safer. Things in law enforcement. Yeah, sure, there's going to be robocops and drones and automation of the law enforcement capacity, but when it comes to the more higher level functioning of, say, within the FBI or typical large metropolitan police department or what have you, there's still going to be a lot of forensic science jobs and things that are not going to be outsourced anytime soon because they involve a kind of creative and analytical style of thinking that robotics is not as advanced to the point of taking over just yet. Military-industrial complex jobs, unfortunately, are going to be in high demand because of all of these trends going on. There's more conflict in our society. When the social compact comes under pressure with an economy that doesn't provision the goods and services and a standard of living that keep people happy, you get more friction in society. And so all of these things relating to law enforcement or the military-industrial complex are probably safer areas. The mining industry, the energy industry, green technology. We're going to get more into technology in a moment as well. More in terms of energy in a moment because that is directly related to all these dystopian dynamics. So there are areas where one can see more safer job security. High-end customer service relationships. I mean, you're never going to see a robot take the place of a concierge at a five-star hotel or the front desk or the chef or all of these places and job positions that are associated with an expectation by the customer base to have a high level of human sensitivity and interaction that a robot simply is not going to be able to replicate, particularly for the high-end market where the customers are going to demand that kind of high-touch relationship. So, Jason, you want to throw in others that you've been thinking about?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't know we were going to do the career advice or ways to protect income from robots, but I think being adaptable, and I talk about this on a lot of podcasts, I think whether it's the financial crisis, and it looks like, Eric, that we're going to have this robots acceleration and adoption during the financial crisis. So it could potentially be for people who aren't paying attention, it could be a double whammy where the financial crisis hurts them, their investments, and then also if they're not prepared, and then also robotics and automation could hurt their income and their job. So I think the best thing for people is to, and I say this like I said all the time, is to be adaptable and resilient. And that means whether you've mastered a skill or not, and hopefully you have, so you at least have some good income right now, or you own a business, or you're about to start a business, and you have a good business plan and things like that, is to devote your life to learning and to add skills cheaply and efficiently as possible. So there's a lot of educational sources out there to learn the skills as an autodidact or whatever. People can learn coding so much faster online. You can learn computer programming without spending $40,000 a year going to expensive computer programming schools. There's ways to learn it cheaply and efficiently. You can learn another language, whether that's Mandarin Chinese or Spanish or something. Unless we have C3PO, unless everyone has a personal C3PO, that's probably going to be useful skills for international business going forward. And there's just so many other examples. But in terms of the industries, like you said, that I think are going to be safe from robots and automation, I think sales is a good one. I know sales is a dirty word for most people, but if you're in business, if you have the best product or service in the world and no one knows about it, Eric, you're not marketing it and you're not selling it, you don't have a business. So you better learn how to, if you're not good at sales, not good at talking to people, interacting them, being able to read people a little bit, using a little bit of psychology or something to understand people better, you better find someone and partner with someone who's good at that. Because like I said, if you have the best product or service in the world, but you can't sell it, you can't speak highly about it or talking points or anything, you're going to struggle. And so I think sales, the robots right now, they're not designed for that. They may be able to design maybe they can make an algorithm, like you said, and make a good song, but a lot of other creative thinking, I don't think they're going to excel at yet. We're still at least a decade or two, maybe longer, from really genuine artificial intelligence, maybe even longer than that, depending upon which robotics expert you talk to, although the most optimistic ones are about 15, 20 years. Ray Kurzweil, the guy who works for Google now, and he wrote The Singularity. I think he's the most optimistic one. But some of the other ways are, the robots are just not really good with customer service jobs. So they're not good at dealing with people. People don't want to call into a phone number, and they don't want to deal with an automated voice. If they have a really serious problem, if it's an emergency, right? If your tickets to your trip got screwed up, or something important like with your itinerary, or you have or your restaurant meal got screwed up really bad and you went to a 5-star restaurant, you don't want to deal with an automated voice number. If you paid thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars for something, you don't want to deal with a robot or a voice like that. You want a human being to be nice to you and polite and actually listen. So I don't think robots and automation are going to be able to handle those things, at least not yet and not for a while.
You can imagine somebody complaining, yes, my steak was wrong. I'm sorry, sir, we do not sell rakes.
It'd be like, I do not eat steak. I eat motor oil. I cannot sympathize, or something like that. That make the person even angrier. I do not know why humans eat steak. Beep 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 beep. Yeah, so these movies that are out there, Eric, a lot of them are whether it's Ultron with Avengers, which is a robot that can rebuild its body and it has artificial intelligence and it wants to destroy the human race, or Megatron, which is from Transformers. It's a Decepticon and it can rebuild its body. It has artificial intelligence and it wants to enslave the human race, or Skynet from Terminator, which wants to destroy the human race, basically destroy the planet Earth. There's just different versions of robots out there, and then there's also R2-D2 and C-3PO, which are, the nicer, friendlier robots where they're kind of good friends, they're buddies, they help you out, they hang out, they can have polite conversations and things like that. So I don't know if the future that Martin Ford talked about is extremely dystopian, but I think, Eric, from reading his book, he did present a lot of the academic studies and the industries where he thinks, whether it's doctors with diagnostic medicine, IBM Watson potentially destroying a good amount of jobs there, because IBM Watson can look up all the medical books and look up different symptoms very quickly that most doctors can't all remember. Even a group of doctors, the TV show House, he was saying that IBM Watson's going to basically make that mostly obsolete. I think Martin Ford's political bent and his position in life, I think that influenced a lot of his solutions, let's just say, because what he was saying was that, the future is not going to be that bad. We'll give people $40,000, $50,000 a year. They don't have to work. And we'll just tax and regulate everything a lot more. And everyone can have universal health care. That's not a big deal. And he spent, unfortunately, in a robotics book, which is, I think, kind of rare, he spent about, and he didn't even talk about the financial crisis that I think is going to get worse, but he spent a quarter of the book bashing free markets and libertarians and capitalism and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's essentially a nanny state expansion of the social net to deal with the unemployment problem thesis that he advances. And the problem with this is that when you zoom back 50,000-foot perspective, his master assumption is that the robotic age and automation will provision a greater degree of production of goods and services for lower cost inputs, such that the wealth of society can expand, and that there would be enough, to borrow a term from Marxism, social value, social surplus to be able to pay for the social safety net. And the problem is that in order to build that, you have to have a huge amount of regulations and redistribution of wealth, which screws up the normal processes of capitalism, sending price signals to entrepreneurs, and to have a most efficient allocation of scarce resources to, in fact, produce surplus value. It destroys the Schumpeter creative destruction process. Schumpeter was a very famous Austrian-leaning economist in the 1910s and 20s who advanced this very elegant thesis about how the process of capitalism destroys old industries but creates new jobs. And there's this kind of like dog chasing its tail logic in the minds of people like Ford that really don't understand the contradictory aspects of the solutions that they put forward, because on the one hand, they envision that all of this great social advancement in terms of efficiency will create the ability to basically just redistribute wealth and help people. But in order to make that infrastructure happen, you end up creating systems in the social structure itself in our society that kill or greatly diminish, better said, innovation. So, I mean, it's really a quandary when you think about how these...
He was making some really dumb assumptions, yeah.
I mean, you call them limousine liberals as a common phrase, and I think that's so apropos. They're just a little bit out to lunch when it comes to seeing how all these things fit in the big picture.
Yeah, the assumptions he made a lot of assumptions in his book, and he's assuming, Eric, and he actually blatantly just said it. He said, we can raise the taxes a lot, and it's not going to stop companies innovating and investing and things like that. And he was talking about the 1970s with high taxes and things like that. But there's no guarantee if the government does raise taxes much higher on income taxes and they increase regulation massively, and there's carbon cap. He advocated carbon cap and trade should be drastically should be added and increased. The Obamacare tax should be increased, and there should be universal health care. And then he also talked about Thomas Piketty, and who said that basically all governments should combine to enforce high asset tax increases on all global wealth, and that wealth should be redistributed. So if all of these things, Eric, are happening together, he's still assuming that there's going to be all this reinvestment and innovation and new job creation in spite of that. I think that's a lot of assumptions there, and he was definitely not questioning any of the track record of any of the Keynesian research he was citing in any of this, and he was citing Keynesian research papers from the 1960s about healthcare and so many other things about the financial crisis and things like that. So it's just I think his view of the world, he's just fit some facts together and twisted it to what he wants, and he's made a lot of assumptions in here. But in terms of the actual robotics market, I think right now it's looking like the robots that are most active right now, they're going to go after, the factory worker jobs, whether it's in Amazon or others. They're going to be able to move around the goods through the factory faster to pack up things because, robots don't need healthcare benefits. They don't need retirement benefits. They don't need breaks, mandatory breaks and vacations and things like that. So I think a lot of these lower end, lower skilled jobs, and there's great documentaries out there talking about Baxter, the robot, where this robot has like a computer face and it can be taught very simple repetitive tasks like picking up a fruit as a fruit packer with like a suction cup it has on its arm and then moving it into a crate. It can learn how to do those things. And Baxter costs less than hiring a factory worker and paying him a higher minimum wage and retirement benefits and healthcare and all these other things.
Yeah, the one robot is $20,000, and you can literally go behind it and move its arms and teach it how to do things for movements, and then push a button and instant presto, it can teach 100 other Baxters the same lessons.
Yeah, exactly. So there's those, and then there's self-driving cars, which are not really ready yet. For the roads, although they're testing them for big rigs and taxis and things like that. But I think it's more likely that we're going to see self-driving tractors where robotics and software programs and GPS coordinates, that there's less people to be involved there. So we're more likely, I think, to see self-driving tractors first before self-driving cars on the highways replace every single human driver. Now, Eric, for the next topic here, let me check my show notes, make sure that I'm on point with everything. Yeah, even the author even brought up IBM Watson, and because a lot of other robotic experts suggest that white-collar jobs may not be lost, but he was saying how he thinks a lot of doctor jobs may be lost due to innovations from IBM Watson. He thinks that diagnostic medicine will drastically change. And then to add to that, you have Intuitive Surgical and Transenterix and these other robotics companies that are coming up with new surgical devices. I don't know if that's going to get a lot of surgeons and doctors replaced, but my dad learned, my dad's a retired orthopedic surgeon. He had to learn how to use an arthroscopy machine. So, I mean, that's like joysticks and hands and things like that. And they're getting more complicated with HD webcam monitors and more tinier and more acute robot hands that are more precise. But I don't know if that's going to take away jobs right away, but the training the doctors are going to have to compete and stay in practice. People are going to want robotic surgery if it means that the odds of dying are less and the recovery times are faster. So I think that's the future that we're going to see going forward, at least for a while. I don't think we're going to see massive amounts of jobs immediately replaced, but maybe in the next 2 decades, like we said, we could see 30%. I don't know about 50%, but 30% is a possibility, especially the low end of jobs as politicians try to force in Seattle and Los Angeles and so many other areas, try to force the minimum wage laws higher.
You mentioned politicians, and I laugh because that's probably another area of job security people can pursue. There's always going to be a need for somebody to hear everyone yelling about how mad they are that all their jobs are being lost, and somebody pretending that they have the solution for everything. So, go become a politician. No, I am certainly just joking, but it is amusing.
Yeah, I don't recommend people become politicians. I'm hoping people listen to this podcast, go and do the research on robotics and learn to be entrepreneurs, maybe to come up with ways where maybe someone will listen to this podcast and they'll have the skills necessary and they'll create some other complementary company to the robots and they'll create a whole new industry. Yep. So maybe that's one of the goals of doing podcasts like these, is to not tell people, the sky is falling necessarily, but that, the odds, the probability that we're going to have to deal with automation and robots in the midst of a rapidly increasing financial crisis. So it's it could be a double whammy for people, but if you embrace change and you adapt, it could be a silver lining. It could be a whole new industry with high paying jobs. So, I think that's an important, 2 things: glass half full, glass half empty. It's about your attitude with this, that, if you just say, oh, the robots are going to take my job. Oh, the politicians and central bankers and central planners and bureaucrats, oh, they're going to, take away all our rights and screw everything over. If you just have that attitude and you don't do anything about it, you're already defeated.
And the advance of technology has always been, as technology is wont to be, it can build a house, or you can take a hammer and kill somebody with it. I mean, technology can be a great enhancement to the human experience and human potential, and a lot of that evolution is before us. It's going to be a wonderful thing if we're able to manage to juggle this stress to the overall social compact. So, there's a lot of things to be hopeful about when it comes to the unforeseen possibility for greater advancement of humanity. I mean, we can see very clearly the risk factors that are involved here with job destruction and even, the dystopian cyborg, fear of transhumanism and all of that. And there's a lot of things that could, in the next 50 years, completely alter the entire shape of humanity. But, there could be a lot of great things, too. So it isn't just purely dystopian if we you step back and take a look at it, but it gets back to being conscious of all of these things that could happen in the future, and people being proactive in terms of trying to make policymakers and thought leaders and governments and so forth do the right thing, so to speak. And that's only going to happen if people are aware of what's going on and put pressure on those said entities to do the right thing.
Yeah, well said, Eric. And for our listeners out there, as we wrap up this segment and move on to another one before I close it, I strongly recommend our readers, go watch that documentary on YouTube, Humans Need Not Apply. I think it's only 15 or 20 minutes long. If you have more time, go and read the book, Second Machine Age. Go and read the book, Rise of the Robots. It's not going to be from a libertarian perspective, but you're going to get insights into there about how rapidly the acceleration of automation and software programs and robotics and all these things are coming nowadays and why they're coming. And I think it's important, to prepare for the future in that regard. In terms of moving on to the next topic, if you have a new topic you want to discuss with us, you want us to discuss on the podcast, or you have a question, or you want to nominate a politician or a bureaucrat or a government agency in your country or the United States for a Scumbag of the Week award, we want you guys to use hashtag welcome to Dystopia. So that's WELCOMETODYSTOPIA. So if you want to, if you have something to say to us, maybe you want to enter a logo in our logo contest for Welcome to Dystopia podcast. We have a couple people interested in who want to do the logo. So thank you for sending us interest, and I'll get you your email back hopefully in a day or two. But the last topic, Eric, and I think this is going to be the humor part of the show for today at least, and hopefully we can do a lot of cool things with this going forward, is, every single episode I think we should try to have maybe our Scumbag or Jackass of the Week award. So let's look at some of the nominees.
Yeah. You guys can all vote and say who's the scummiest of them all.
Okay, so we have former Speaker of the House, Denny Haster. Without going into the details, I think most people know the stuff he's done. I mean, the royal families of England have done similar stuff, but he's trying to buy it off. He came to the House of Representatives in the United States with I think he was like 50 years old, and he was a high school gym teacher or junior high gym teacher or something like that. And he barely had, I think, $100,000 to his name, which at the age he was at was not very good. And by the time he left Congress, I think 8 to 10 years later, he was worth almost $10 million with, all these corrupt crony insider land deals and all these other, sweet insider deals he got. Plus, he's allowed to trade as an insider in Congress, sitting in this committee and subcommittee meetings. He's legally allowed to do insider stock trading. So if he hears any inside information in his committee meeting, he's allowed to go out and buy options or shares, and he can't be prosecuted for it. So that's one nomination. The other ones I did, let's see here. We have the Office of Personnel Management, which as a whole, Eric, they made an enormous error. We talked about cybersecurity on the last show, and look at all the stuff that's going on right now. We've seen all these data breaches and hacks, and unfortunately going forward, there's going to be a lot more of these because corporations and governments and individuals just haven't invested enough money in protecting themselves and their data, or they don't understand how easy it is, unfortunately, for the bad hackers to get at their data. We have the Office of Personnel Management that was trying to protect all these federal employee data and I think some military data, and I think they did it in China. Breitbart is saying that they were hiring Chinese firms and storing their data in China.
Yeah, and I mean, we could just, if we spent enough time, we could probably put 100 nominees up for voting. So I think we'll just leave it at that. And on the next show as well, too, our audience is certainly more welcome to send us suggestions for their choice, Jackass and Scumbag of the Week award, and use that hashtag too as well, because it'll help actually build our brand and get people to find us as they, come to see us on Twitter or Facebook or wherever.
Yeah, for fun, I actually Googled. Don't make fun of me because I thought this was fun. I thought it would be a cheap laugh. I Googled government corruption over the last month on Google, and I came up with a whole bunch of corruption stories in many different countries. So Chile and many European countries, many South American countries. Probably the funniest story, though, Eric, I just want to touch on this one really quick, is out of China. And it's that the Chinese Communist Party expects so many government scandals and stories based on corruption and stuff going forward that now they have an official government-sanctioned, actually it's required now, class for Chinese tycoons' children. They receive government training on how to behave after scandals. So I guess they're preparing for PR and spin and all these others. I guess they're expecting so more SHTF in China with their massive amounts of central planning, all the trillions in capital, that they've spent on central planning with houses and trains and so many other things. I actually read this book called Age of Ambition, and it said that over, I think, $200 billion that the Chinese government knows of has been stolen by people who are given contracts, either party officials or government contractors, and taken out of the country for, just theft. Just it was a contract to be used for so-and-so. The money was never spent on that, and it was just blatantly stolen out of the country.
Yeah. You could just disappear for a week if you start Googling government corruption and read all the stories there. We would never see you. We'd have to, fish you out of the bottom of a well.
Yeah, I agree. There's just so many of them, and one of the things to note is that in these other countries in the developing world, in South America or Asia, or even in Europe, these things have been common for a very long time, of political corruption and crony capitalism and things like that. But the U.S. wasn't really known for that until really the last 10, 12 years, and now the U.S. is considered, I think, according to many of these studies, one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
Yeah, and it is quite unfortunate. And that is actually a symptom of the advancement of an empire on its decline. The rats jump ship, the normal ways in which you provision expanding wealth for the overall society begins to get bastardized. You get crony capitalism ever increasing. You see that certainly in the financial system that we talk about all the time. And it's just par for the course when it comes to what societies do in their stages of development. So we got a lot of things ahead that need to be addressed. Before we wrap up, I think it's probably would be a good idea to just kind of put this whole automation theme into context and compare it to how it was with the Industrial Revolution, because that gives some color to what we spoke about before, and it also sets up a really interesting dynamic in terms of what's different now versus what happened in the Industrial Revolution. If you went back to 1800 and you went through that whole 100-year period where the rump of industrialization took place, the one central thing that was different then from now is that we had expanding return on energy investment. The coal revolution really took off 1850 and beyond, and then petroleum came not too many decades thereafter. And it took, compared to what it takes today, a very small amount of energy invested to actually produce a gigantic amount of what some people in the peak oil movement describe as energy slides. A gallon of gasoline can produce what is the equivalent of 2,500 man-hours just to push a car for a mile. And the amount of productivity in society was exploding at the exact same time that jobs were being destroyed by the automation process of the Industrial Revolution. So just the energy dynamics alone in society in the 1800s of England and the United States and other areas was very different from what we see now. We speak a lot about the productivity gains that technology can produce, but in the 1800s, the productivity that was produced strictly by changes in the mode of production driven by energy, in many ways, was actually more profound than what we see in the last 20-some-odd years with the step-up of computerization and automation and so forth. And the key thing that people need to think about, and this goes back as well too in terms of the discussion of what industries would be interesting for greater job security, and the green industries overall being part of that panoply of areas where people will probably find greater efficiencies and job security, is that we're now in a scenario where, give or take, it doesn't happen over 1 year per se, but over a 20, 30-year time frame, we're going to see declining energy intensity and declining energy return on the energy invested to produce what we use for energy to drive our society, because alternative energies are not very energy dense per se, unless if they're gigantic in scale, like huge solar, thermal, steam generating, driving turbine systems in deserts and things along those lines. The typical energies that are produced from solar fields and solar arrays on houses and wind and so forth are intermittent in their production, and they don't scale as easily. And the bottom line is that as we have already peaked in conventional petroleum, and as we continue to go on ever more expensive energy because of this declining energy return on energy investment process, that's going to make it even more difficult to create the social surplus that people like Ford dream are going to be able to be redistributed to create a social safety net. So you want to talk about a dystopian dynamic over 30, 40 years? I mean, this is kind of a cluster frog. We've got the robotics problems and the automation problems that present themselves to the employment market. And then in a broader scheme of things, I mean, robotics even takes more energy.
Yep. Yeah, we were discussing that before the show.
Like,
how we may be using robots in 10, 15, 20 years to either mine asteroids, or the robots are going to help us find either metal or oil and gas under the ocean. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a very challenging next generation. This is a generational problem, and it isn't just automation. It's also energy and the way in which we obtain it, and the declining energy return on energy investment dynamic that we must also fit into this puzzle. So I wanted to throw that out there because this is a compound problem.
Yeah, there's all these different factors in play here, and I think a lot of people, just talking about the financial crisis, they leave out robots or things like that. So hopefully we've gotten our listeners' interest piqued about this, and I think that's a great point, Eric, that robots are potentially going to use a lot of energy, and we may be another potential job. We could switch if we're going deeper and deeper into the earth to mine metal. We may switch to robots there because the robots can handle the heat or the pressure better than human beings can. So we may see, full robot mining where the humans are not, it's not safe for humans, and we may see, full robots sometime in the future as well.
Indeed, and in the energy industry, we're already there.
Now, I think one of the points, and I forgot to touch on this to wrap up the show, is if the robot thing does play out the way kind of we see it, or Martin Ford or some of these other experts see it, people are going to have in some potentially a lot more free time. They may lose their job, but if you do have some money saved up and you've invested properly, it's how do you use that free time. So if you have 2 years to retrain yourself and learn a new skill, some people may sit on their butt and feel depressed and feel sorry for themselves, but other people, if you have that extra time, you have money saved up, or your other family members have jobs that are safe, you could take that extra time and you can add a number in a year or 2 or 3. You can use that extra time wisely, and you could retrain yourself, or you don't have to go back to school. You can learn a good skill or trade, maybe to repair cars or something, or computer programming or something else along those lines, and you could use that time wisely. But I think the dystopian future Martin Ford says is that, most people aren't going to use that free time wisely, and he just wants to give them a check, and he doesn't care if they sit around on their butt doing nothing, and he's just going to try to tax everyone more for that right to do something along those lines. In wrapping things up here, I think our listeners should definitely go look at Baxter, the robot. I think it's a pretty amazing innovation that man created something like that, the Baxter or the robot.
And there's 2
that
minutes to talk about Baxter as well in that documentary. And the 15 minutes, humans need not apply, so you can get a summary of what Baxter can do in that, and as well other aspects of the stuff that we're talking about on the show. Highly recommended. Great documentary.
Yeah. I think they should also go look at Intuitive Surgical, the surgical robots, or Transenterix, which is the other robot surgical company. I think there's a couple more smaller ones. And then Boston Dynamics, which is owned by Google now, I believe,
yes.
And they're financed by DARPA, and there's MIT robotics guys working there. And they're the ones who, if you Google videos of robots, you're seeing like the cheetah robot, which has all these sensors, and it can jump over hurdles. And there's dog robots and mule robots, and I think they're working on the Atlas soldier robot now.
Yes.
Well, I just want to thank our listeners for listening to this podcast. I hope they learned something useful about something that's potentially dystopian. It might not be fully dystopian, but it's important to have awareness of the technology markets that are going around you, not just the financial crisis. But we could potentially see both of these things rapidly accelerating, with the financial crisis getting worse and worse in the near future, and also robotics accelerating. And if you're not paying attention to either of these things, you could be in a lot of trouble. But if you've adapted your life, you can survive this thing and maybe even thrive. Eric, any more thoughts before we wrap up?
I think this is a good place to stop.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening, and we definitely want to continue to push the envelope, whether it's talking about the financial crisis or talking about interesting topics like automation and robots that are potentially dystopian. I think we tried to inject some interesting humor into this discussion here, where it wasn't all completely negative, that, the future is going to be shit. It's going to be all totally shit. And I think we provided some interesting advice and solutions for career and people like that to, if you're going to have free time with robots, if you're going to have some free time that's created from automation and robots, you better learn how to use it wisely, because technology and the future, it's just changing so rapidly at this point. It's changing a lot more rapidly than many experts even expected. Like I said, when you go back and watch the other robotics and automation documentaries, and software programs are improving and Moore's law is improving. So we're in a very interesting time in history, combined with other technologies now at this point.
And if anybody in our listening audience thinks of particular fields that will be cushioned from these dynamics, go ahead and post those comments on our YouTube channel or on Facebook. It'll be interesting to read them, and if there's quite a few of them, we'll compile them and publish them on a single list.
Yeah, I'm sure, Eric, that we're going to have future robotics shows going forward. So maybe we're not going to have one for 6 months or a year, but I'm sure robots are going to be in the news a lot going forward, because like I said, and the people are not free market. Austrians go libertarian. They're not noticing these two things, but I think the law of unintended consequences is really coming into action, where we have a higher minimum wage plus cheap capital. So you have these two things which are making a big sweet spot, unfortunately, for robots, and the fact that, robots don't need to get more health care, and they don't need more retirement benefits. And well, thanks for listening to Welcome to Dystopia. This is Jason Burack and Eric Dubin signing off, and hopefully we'll have you back listening to the next Welcome to Dystopia podcast, so you can put your rose-colored glasses back on and you can dance your way to Oz.